You're listening to Market the Brew, a leading resource for promoting and marketing craft beer. Join in as we share with you, straight from the source, tools and strategies craft brewers from around the country are using right now to achieve significant success.
This brewery has been super lucky as it has grown in a Milwaukee suburb. What started out as a house the owner and his family bought and lived in later turned out to have been zoned as a brewery when the house was built over 100 years ago. This home brewer found his passion for beer at a Friday night fish fry here in Milwaukee. Each Friday he would stop into this brewery for fish, ask questions, and then spend the weekend brewing. The more he brewed, the greater his passion for brewing grew. He finally found a job at a brewery in Illinois that would help him gain experience and help him on his path to opening his doors one day. With a brewery in his basement, licensed and permitted to sell packaged beer, he started to sell barrel-aged beers in bottles out of his house on Saturdays once a month. You had to pre-buy, then pick up your beer during the hours specified. If this sounds a little rigid, it's because they started selling beer during the pandemic. If you were going to open a brewery, this was definitely the route you'd want to take. You could almost say that the planets started to align for this brewer as he and his wife discussed the future of their home and their business. But I don't want to ruin the story. Listen in as Travis and I talk to this new brewer about his unique entry into the world of brewing and brewery ownership. Before we start the podcast, a quick reminder that the Market the Brew podcast is available at marketthebrew.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio podcasts, and other popular podcast sites. The video of these episodes will be available on the Promote the Brew YouTube channel for you to watch or listen in. We hope that you will join us and share these episodes with your family, friends, and complete strangers on social media. Now find a comfortable place to sit, grab a glass of your favorite beer, kick back and relax, and listen in as we chat with Rob Brennan, founder of Supermoon Brewing Company in Bayview, Wisconsin, as he shares his story. Cheers! Hi, Rob. Thanks for meeting with us tonight.
Hey, everybody. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'll start by asking you to introduce yourself and your brewery.
Sure. My name is Rob Brennan. I am the owner and brewer here at Supermoon Beer Company.
And Rob, how did you get into brewing?
You know, I've listened to your show, and this is the most unoriginal answer, but I was a home brewer.
Right.
You might have been able to place that bet. Yeah, like a lot of folks, I started, got bit by the bug and started home brewing. I visited a friend of mine during college who was at school up at Michigan Tech, and there's a lot of engineers up that way, and went to visit them, and they were brewing beer in their basement, and I kind of just couldn't believe it, and came home and immediately started brewing in my kitchen, and taking the tour at Lakefront Brewery at least once a week for my college experience and beyond.
That's a good tour, though. That one's really entertaining, and they really get you excited about beer.
Yeah, they did, and that's the thing. I was kind of caught in that moment of being ready anyway, and it just pushed me way over the edge to be excited about it and kind of dig in and learn everything I could and kind of just fall down the rabbit hole.
Well, and just being in Milwaukee, there's so many different places to learn from and kind of get into brewing or beer and kind of learn what styles you're interested in, try to make them.
Now there are, yeah. I mean, then it was.
Yeah, now there are.
I would just Friday would come and I would just go get fish fry at Lakefront and spend a couple bucks and get a couple beers and some really good information and then go home and brew.
Sounds like a great Friday night,
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah, no, not bad. Yeah, these days are a little different, but yeah.
So how long has the Supermoon been in business, would you say?
So a hair over 2 years. So we, ideas for this in some iteration for damn near 20 years at this point. But we started the project in 2019, and I can kind of get into that. But we sold our first beer in November of 2020, like deep pandemic, and
Right.
We started the business selling bottles of beer, basically like under a plexiglass shield. under our door November of 2020. So we've been just a bit longer than 2 years technically in business.
Yeah.
But our tap room just opened
Yeah.
past Halloween.
And going from like a home brewer to opening your own brewery, like where was that aha moment? Like, I kind of want to jump to that next step.
So I had the opportunity back in 2014 to join a group who were starting a brewery, and I got on board and helped open that brewery. And that was very much the foray into my kind of cutting my teeth at a professional level and really learning what behind the curtain meant in terms of running a commercial brewery and relationship building for wholesale distribution and working with distributors and sales reps and getting your beer on the shelf and maintaining your beer on the shelf and hosting events and all of that was stuff I picked up at Penrose Brewing Company. It's a brewery outside of Chicago.
Okay.
And so I was kind of just like banking all that information. There wasn't necessarily an aha moment. It was much more like I'm going to be a sponge and kind of understand everything I can about the business in this kind of unique position I happen to be in, kind of coming in at the front end of that brewery. And in case we ever found ourselves like really wanting to take the plunge. And it wasn't entirely planned. We'll say that. And I'll tell you the story. I'm sure.
Yeah. And then I guess how many barrels would you say you produce from the beginning to now? And then I guess kind of like where you want to go in your future.
So from the beginning, yeah, it's been kind of an interesting exercise in production planning. Whereas most breweries are kind of like, this is what our sort of cellar capacity is, and this is what we think we have the potential to produce in a year, and then they kind of aim for that and brew it. My production calendar is a little bit different because the majority of it is based on overproducing beer that goes into oak barrels that I then blend at completely varying amounts of time, between anywhere from a young beer would be like 3 months in the barrel to more likely 12 or 18 months. And actually we just packaged a beer that was 3 years in the barrel. So there isn't quite a straight line of production. So what we produce in a year is usually like twice what we sell, just because we have so much beer aging. But we'll aim to sell about 100 barrels of beer a year.
Yeah.
So about 200 kegs worth of beer.
And then you guys strictly just do bottles, right? Like to sell wise over like the counter, and you're not in any stores or anything yet?
We are, yeah. We are in a small group of accounts here in town. We're probably at like 10 bars, restaurants, and stores here in town. And then about every other month, I make a run out to Madison, and we're in about 10 spots up there.
Nice.
So it's just me I'm our distribution.
Yeah.
I'm all the hats. But yeah, so it's just a really nice group of consistent accounts that our beer makes sense in these places, and a lot of them are restaurants. And we're just kind of like on the menu, offering some food-friendly styles of farmhouse beers. And then we're in much more packaged, like off-premise stores and bottle shops and things like that in Madison, and kind of a little bit more on-premise restaurants and bars here.
Okay.
And we do draft. We're kind of ramping up draft now that the tap room's open here, and we can kind of understand sell through and draft depletion here. We have some ability to kind of keg off some things for distribution, and I'll just load up my car and go deliver the kegs myself, and then pick up the empties as well.
We've heard of a lot of breweries that do that as well. And it's been really cool to see your business grow through these few years. We first heard about you from Scott from Market the Brew.
Sure.
And when he saw that our page was kind of us touring different breweries, he's like, you guys need to check out Supermoon. And we like put in the GPS, and it was like 2 years ago. And we're like, Scott, this is a house. He's like, yeah, but they do like bottle distribution, like and bottle releases. And so we jumped on your email list, and we started hearing about the releases and then your social media page. And it was just really cool to see your growth.
Thank you. Yeah, the growth. We joke. I heard this quote actually. I'm going to paraphrase it, but it was from Sam Calagione, who owns Dogfish Head Brewing. And he has this quote. He wrote a book called Brewing Up a Business, and it's kind of like a sort of a memoir and kind of like a how-to about how to start a brewery. And there's a quote, I forgot if it was in the book or if it was an interview about the book, but he said something to the effect of the business plan is the greatest work of fiction you'll ever write. I found that to be particularly true in our case because I wrote this business plan, based on like this very specific thing. It's like, it's going to open, it's going to do this, and then we're going to serve beer in tap room and distribution, the whole thing. And then the pandemic happened, and almost every single detail of that business plan went out the window, including like a marketing strategy. So growth has happened entirely sort of organically, very slow, very constant, like very slow and steady, but definitely like an incline. It's just not nearly as quick as I might have thought it was when I was writing that work of fiction.
But how impressive too that you were able to grow through that time when a lot of places weren't able to remain constant or had to close. I mean, that's a huge victory.
Remarkable. And just, yeah, so lucky because the way we kind of came into existence happened on a total lark to be a period of time when the entire country was kind of revisiting the at-home drinking occasion. And our beer, as we switched into this kind of like bottled format, bottle conditioned, package conditioned, naturally carbonated beers that are just a little more expensive because of the version of things that they are and kind of what they take to produce. But we happened to meet people in this occasion where they were like not going anywhere and willing to spend a couple extra bucks to try out this new wacky brewery. And what ended up happening was just the very best version of you put something out there that you really work your ass off at, and people just happen to like it enough to become repeat customers. And then they kind of stayed with us as we handed them beer under the door for a year.
I mean, during the pandemic, I mean, you had to pretty much just do bottles alone to survive. Like most other breweries, like either bottles or cans or whatever, just over the counter.
Yeah.
For the bottles, how often did you like do the pre-sales, and how often did you put a new beer out? So
we started with like essentially like a quarterly sort of a release, every couple months. It was usually like every 2 or 3 months, something new would kind of start to roll into being ready. And that was really just a product of the first 16 months of production. I brewed a ton of beer and filled a ton of barrels, and they were staggered. The production schedule was intentionally staggered so that I would have, beer at varying ages in barrels that I could blend with. And then kind of once that first like 12 to 16 months came around, we released our first 2, and then barrels just started to kind of become ready and more ready after that. And so the gap started to close a little bit as beer became ready more often. So we started like every 2 to 3 months, and then it became like monthly for kind of the rest of that first, year and a half or so. So we were kind of releasing beer every month. And you're right, we did only bottles at that point until the spring of last year, where we started doing this like little beer garden model out front and started kind of kegging off a little bit more of what we were doing so that we could have just a short menu of like 3 or 4 beers for people to drink out in our front yard here. Also totally just a way to survive and not necessarily
right.
as part of our business plan.
So we've actually visited Supermoon, and it was super cool because it really looked like a house.
Yeah.
And Travis always makes fun of me because whenever we travel or go to new places, we'll always sit down and I'll say, Travis, I think this used to be a house. And he'd be like, oh, not again. Like, yeah. I don't know. I just always get like that homey vibe in places. And when we pulled up to your brewery, I was like, Travis, I think this used to be a house. And he's like, no way.
You are correct on this one. I'm sitting in what used to be our living room. Yeah, so this was our house originally. And we just kind of got lucky. So the building is very old. It's 122 years old.
Oh, wow.
And it was built in 1902. And when we got here all these years later, the plan was just to buy this kind of crappy old building, to be frank about it. It was in really rough shape. And it was a storefront, which is like kind of what you see in back of me here. It's the little shop front. And then there were 2 apartments. And my plan was just to like, you know, get here, and my wife and I were just gonna like be by the park in this neighborhood that we love, and we are gonna work on the apartments and just kind of like be here and kind of call it a day. And the week we ended up closing on the building, our commercial tenant at the time told us that she was leaving to expand her business. And so we were like, great, good luck. And we found ourselves without a commercial tenant, and we had never been commercial landlords. We were like, what do we do with this? Like, who do we market this space to, and what can it be? And we found out in looking at some of the paperwork to kind of find that out, that the building was zoned to be a brewery from 120 years ago.
Wow.
No way.
Yeah. So, and it was never used as one, but it was zoned that way. And that is, if you ask anybody, it's one of the toughest hurdles to kind of get one of these things off the ground, is making sure zoning is going in your favor, so you can kind of get the ball rolling with federal licensing and state permits and things like that. And we just didn't have to jump that hurdle because the building was already zoned as a potential brewery. So
Wow.
yeah, we got really lucky in this kind of oddball grandfathered zoning scenario, and looked at each other and we were kind of like, like
That's a sign.
Right.
I was kind of like, no way. Like, I know what this takes, and this is a crazy thing. And my wife was like, I think we kind of owe it to ourselves to like explore this. And we joke that the cosmos like handed us the opportunity to like kind of choose to commit to it. And so, yeah, right after we found that out, we began the process of getting our federal permits to brew. And I would come home from my day job and basically build out the brewery and brew beer and fill barrels at night for like a year. And then we started kind of just like piecing it together over the course of time while we lived here, and then have since moved out up the street.
That sounds like the best house buy ever. Like, surprise, honey, I bought a house
Yeah,
that's a brewery.
very, very serendipitous. Yeah, we feel really just like lucky. There's like no other way around it. It was a fluke, and it just happened to work out really well. And yeah, we're just like thrilled that it's finally real and in existence, and kind of where we wanted it to be. And to your point, like this was our house. It kind of looks like it's our house, and we wanted to kind of lean into having sort of a unique experience here of coming into somebody's home in Bayview and drinking really, really good beer and feeling comfortable. And it's a neighborhood joint, and we wanted to kind of have it stay that way instead of dressing it up like something else.
Yeah, it was definitely really cool. Like, when we came to visit, we kind of sat down and we're like, what was this? Was this our kitchen? Like, was this like a living room?
Yeah.
And it does have like that homey vibe. Like, you're out on a date night, but you're still feeling like you're kind of at home having a beer, like with your husband.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad it felt like that, because that was totally the goal. And honestly, it was a really hard thing to aim for. Like, if you really try and make something feel authentically homey, you end up kind of over homifying it in a way.
Yeah.
And we were kind of freaked out by that, but it turned out kind of the way we hoped it would. And the feedback has come back to kind of corroborate that too, that people just kind of feel good here. It's got a nice kind of low key, kind of casual, cozy, homey feeling about it. And actually, it's funny you say that. There's a burn hole on the ground over here from where the original tenants had a wood burning stove. So you can very much see where the kitchen was.
Oh my gosh. We're coming back to look now.
Literally.
We'll be those weird people looking at your floors.
Pulling up the rugs.
But it was super cool too. Like, when you posted your before pictures of renovation and after, and you kind of took some videos too along the way, kind of what that process looked like. And it's crazy to see how you've made that space a brewery and how much work you've had to do.
Yeah, I credit a lot of that to working in a brewery before this. Just really starting to understand like a process, like what a process flow looks like from grain to glass, and kind of how to sort of structure a linear production process. And we just happened, again, kind of luckily, to fall into this building that is, from the street, it doesn't look like much. It just looks like kind of a house, but its linear square footage is pretty deep all the way back to the alley. So functionally, from like a manufacturing standpoint, like moving a process through, it actually works really well for a small scale brewery. So I kind of just understood what a good kind of functional layout was for that. And I just kind of mirrored what I knew to a much smaller scale here.
And just having Milwaukee be such a large city with so many different pockets of it, what made you choose Bayview as your home for Supermoon?
Well, Bayview kind of chose us by way of the brewery just being what it was. I can honestly say that if we moved into like a bungalow or something in Bayview that wasn't zoned to be a brewery, it probably never would have happened. So we just got really lucky with being like, at the time we were looking for a home here. It was really because we just loved Bayview, and we started to grow to love it because my wife Maria, her brother, was going to school here, and we were living in Chicago at the time, and just kind of kept visiting my now brother and sister-in-law, and they actually used to live like a couple blocks away from where the brewery is now, and now they live a few blocks away from us. But they kind of had us like anchored here, and we would come to Bayview and go to the restaurants and eat at Good Kind and Odd Duck and Tenuda's and a bunch of like places that we've come to love, and drink beer at the breweries. And we're just like, man, we just like love it here, and it feels really good here. So we had been in Chicago for like a decade together and decided to sort of replant our roots. And we were looking in Bayview to live and like to try and buy a home. And we ended up buying a brewery. So it was very much like Bayview charmed us enough to want to live here and kind of like start a family here and stuff like that. And then we just got, the dice just rolled a totally lucky way, and into that the house we bought was a brewery. So
Wow.
it wasn't necessarily like picking the spot for the brewery as much as it was picking Bayview and getting lucky with this thing.
I think you're the first one to have a story like that for us.
For real.
Yeah, it's I totally recognize how rare that is. That is not how it works typically.
Like you said, the cosmos just aligned.
Yeah, honestly, you can't really I can't really assign much more logic to it than
Yeah.
that.
And just with how things kind of work themselves out, did you have like a set date for your tap room opening? And did you make it there, or did things kind of have to change?
Yeah, we sure did. And we had a plan that would have originally had us opening the tap room April of this year. And it ended up being October 31st. So, in like this, in the real scheme of things, I think that's kind of a common story with build outs and renovating a 120-year-old building. And yeah, so we definitely missed that date that we opened. But what we had was a production brewery below us. So the way this is set up is, I'm in our tap room right now, and it's basically like 1,800 square feet. And then there's basically a mirror of that footprint in the basement. And, years before the tap room was even close to opening, we got licensed as a beer manufacturing center, like an alcohol production facility in the basement. So we were permitted, and we had an occupancy permit and a license to make and distribute beer from the production area only. So while the upstairs where we're in now was getting built out and turned into a tap room, I still had the ability to make beer, sell beer. And then we did this little like beer garden thing. We built a parklet out in the front, and kind of ran this sort of beer garden pop-up model to keep draft beer moving while this thing was kind of slowly getting built and delayed and built and delayed. And So again, super, super lucky, because if it was just a singular building that was delayed in getting built out, we'd be kind of hosed. Like most people just have to wait, until the whole place is done. And we thankfully had a little speakeasy brewery operation allowing us to stay alive while the tap room was getting built out.
And how welcoming has the community been? Because I mean, I dream of living right next door to a brewery. Like that has to be very, very fun.
Well, I'll tell you, the house next door to us is going to go up for sale pretty shortly. So keep an eye out.
Hello, baby.
Shameless plug for some new neighbors, but the community is the only reason I'm talking to you right now. Our local community, and we've had a remarkable show of support from people outside of Milwaukee. We get people regularly coming in from like the Fox Cities area.
Wow.
Green Bay and Appleton, and a lot of folks from Madison kind of coming and rolling through town. Chicago, we have Chicago visitors all the time coming up and kind
Amazing.
of, here to really just check out Milwaukee's, brewery scene in general. But we're on the south side of town, and we tend to be kind of a first stop as people roll into town. And it's kind of that slow, organic audience building that has really allowed us to live. But our main pocket of neighbors and local folks are the ones that just seemed to like what we were doing and liked to support it. And gosh, they're truly the only reason we're here. I mean, I couldn't think of a more supportive community to be in than this. And in fact, like just reflecting on it now, sometimes I don't lose sight of it, but I forget about it, maybe willingly, because it was so traumatic for me. But when this was getting built, and it was like an uninsulated construction site, people were still going on our web shop, pre-ordering bottles. Aww. And walking up to the front door in the blistering cold. And I was like layered up and freezing, and people would like drink out front in the cold and in the rain. And I just it was remarkable to me. So the dedication to us, I hope I hope they at least can recognize that I was trying to give it back to them in the forms of that kind of energy, but it got us here. So
yeah, you can't keep Wisconsinites away from the beer.
No, we have to be
snow.
Right place for like the tailgating set to flex the muscles a little bit and drink in the cold and the rain.
The beer coat.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit how the listeners can get your beer. You do different bottle releases. Your tap room is open. When people come and visit your brewery, can they expect to get just pints, or do you have flights, or kind of what would that look like?
Yeah, so traditionally people have just gone to our web shop to pre-order bottles, and then they just kind of come here to pick them up. But now that the tap room's open, we have a fridge full of cold packaged beer. We have 4 packs of our flagship beer called Saison Bayview available year round. And I'm just looking at our cooler right now, and we have like 4 or 5. We have 6 other bottles available cold in the cooler. And then we have 8 beers on draft and a kombucha on draft. So yeah, they can come here and get draft pours in some fancy glassware. And we don't do flights. And I have a whole list about why, but we do half pours. So, and that's actually our highest selling anything here. Our highest kind of selling item is the half pour. And you can basically get a half pour of anything we have on draft for $4, and it's about a 6-ounce pour. So it's larger than a typical flight sample, and we serve it to you in stemware. So you get to kind of like spend a little more time with the beer and see it in a more kind of clear, pretty glass, and stick your nose in it and smell it a little easier. And so yeah, the half pours have been our most popular thing. And by way of the half pour, you can sample them all and kind of build your own flight that way. But we don't do like a traditional like 3-ounce in a tiny glass and or pick 5 or whatever. So you can get a half pour of anything, and tons of people do.
And it's funny you mentioned the glassware because I remember you guys do have fancy glasses. Like I
Yeah.
felt so
Yeah, that's-
sophisticated.
Yeah, you know, not necessarily because we want to like over fancify the experience. It's actually kind of the opposite. Um, you know, someday if you get to come back and tour the place, you'll see that the brewery is remarkably unfancy. It is a rustic kind of more European farmhouse style mechanical operation than it is like a industrial manufacturing process. It's a little more hands-on and a little kind of like it's just less fancy. The beer is decidedly less fancy than a modern kind of manufactured uh, macro beer or whatever.
Mhm.
And the glass is much more about we think beer should be like presented a certain way, and especially for how hard we work to get these beers out of the barrel and into the bottle carbonated properly and into the keg carbonated properly. We like to build up our beers with a nice head of foam on them, and the two glasses that we picked are kind of more about the function than they are the form. They just happen to look really pretty. So the one glass we have is like kind of a skinny, it's called a Willy Becker. It's like a German glass. And that's for most of our stainless beers. It just showcases the beer really nice
Mhm.
and feels good in your hand. And you can kind of like, just feels like a nice session experience with that glass. And then mostly anything that comes from our oak program, blending program and wild fermentation is in stemware. And it's also really because not only does it showcase it really nice and we can build up a nice head of naturally carbonated foam, but kind of allows you just to like warm it up and sit with it like kind of like you would at a wine bar and
Mhm.
really just kind of swirl it around, get your nose deep in there and smell it. And um, it's really more about that than it is like a wine glass. It's
Yeah.
kind of like it actually sort of serves a purpose for the styles of beers that we make.
Well, and it's funny that you say that, like just kind of spending time with the beer, because
Yeah.
I think it took us like one or two beers before like we realized your logo had a ghost.
Oh
And then
yeah.
we started like talking like, how did you come up with the name Supermoon? Like, and we never found out why, but it took us like two beers before we're like,
Um,
huh, what's on our glass?
yeah, the ghost goes over people's head all the time, and it's funny because it's on the stemware. And the moon with the ghost in it is on our shorter Willy stem or our Willy glassware. And the moon, I'll start with the moon before I get into the ghost. But so like when we started kind of writing this original business plan and kind of knew that we were going to be focusing on farmhouse style beers and sort of beers that were much more like based around slower sort of long complex fermentations that kind of took a long time, we were like, well, we might actually start this business doing kind of a bottle release style model, if only because that's how long the beers take to make. And so we're like, well, there's kind of like a nice little metaphor between the sort of sporadic nature of the beers being available at all with the schedule of kind of like what a supermoon is. And then we started kind of drawing out the metaphors. So like of the 12 or 13 full moons in a year, just a handful of them are supermoons. And when it's a supermoon, it's just a little more like vibrant and bright and complex and
Oh, that's
interesting.
cool.
You kind of stare at it a little longer and like it might captivate you a little quicker than a regular full, old full moon. And we kind of started to draw the metaphor between like the beers being just kind of that little extra something compared to a normal like everyday drinker. And we like that. And then we kind of drew it a little bit further to say that when you make beer with wild yeast in oak barrels, the way that we do, if you were to pop open the bung on the barrel and look down inside of it, you'd see this kind of like dusty, bubbly surface on the top of the liquid, and that's unique to these styles of fermentations. It's this biofilm called a pellicle, and a pellicle remarkably kind of looks like this like lunar surface. And so it sort
Wow.
of looks like when you look in a barrel, it sort of looks like you're looking at the surface of the moon. So we liked all those things together, and Supermoon kind of became what it became. And as I was designing the logo, I had kind of a Rorschach test moment where I was like, I don't want to just have a moon, like a stock moon. So I did it all by hand and like cutting out shapes, and
Oh
and
my
I had
gosh.
this moment where this thing just landed where it was like, that kind of looks like a ghost. And So I like refined the ghost, gave him a name. He has a name. His name is Rufus. Rufus in our moon, he's our moon ghost, our brewery ghost. The metaphor for him is kind of directing people to like our wild yeast, which is this invisible force that kind of floats around the brewery and has an influence on everything. But it's like a friendly ghost kind of a thing. But it's sort of a
Rufus,
metaphor
the friendly ghost.
wild yeast. Yeah.
That's super cool. I
Yeah.
never would have guessed that.
No, definitely not.
Well, that's for the tour. That's a total like tour thing. Is like why and what's with the ghost?
And so you do give tours then at Supermoon?
From time to time, yeah. We're kind of just getting our feet under us with like tap room functioning properly right now, and we're finally things are smooth sailing, and we're finally kind of there. So we'll probably start to schedule them more often. But we've done a handful of them, and because it's a really small brewery, it's less of a tour and a little bit more of kind of an intimate tasting. So I take people down to the brewery and we sit in the brewery and we call our tour cellar sessions. So a cellar session is basically like 10 people at a time. We sit down in the barrel cellar and we'll taste some like single barrel products and talk about Supermoon and why is it called that and what's the story. And we really start to focus on oak barrel fermentation, mixed culture, sour beers, what they are, what they're not, fruiting, bottle conditioning and natural carbonation, and kind of just from a technical standpoint, all those things. And the way we've kind of pitched it to people is that it's a little more of like a 201 style brewery tour, where once you've taken like the amazing lakefront tour and you kind of get like the 101 style, like water, yeast, malt, hops, understanding of what beer is, you can kind of peel back a layer and get a little more into the nitty gritty on like barrels and blending and wild fermentation and things like that.
I feel like that's really something popular in this area with how many home brewers are in Milwaukee and just how many breweries are in Milwaukee. I could see that being a very educational and interesting tour for a lot of people to go on.
Yeah, it's fun. I think, I used to give a lot of brewery tours at the last brewery I worked at, and it's just the ability for people to ask those questions and get the information kind of back to them instead of just like a script is really where I think it starts to add value to just like understand, kind of demystifying things and telling them what it is and what it isn't. And if you think there's a bunch of questions on a regular brewery tour, you should see what happens. Tons of questions, and I'm 100% glad to dive into it because it's, not all breweries are created equal, and you kind of like have to sort of explain your point of view, especially when you're doing weird stuff like this. It's kind of important to have that dialogue with people and explain kind of what your real intention is.
Well, you have a lot to offer at Supermoon. It's incredible how much your business has, and your tap room has only been open for a few months. I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah, the ghost thing, people thought that we opened on Halloween because of that.
Oh my gosh.
The reality is it just like happened to cross the finish line at that point. It was totally by chance. But yeah, we've only been open a couple months.
And then you have an event coming up. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that entails?
Yeah, well, we've got a few this weekend. Well, I guess by the time this runs, we'll probably miss it. But we're starting to kind of have some community partners that are using our space to kind of showcase things that they do, makers and craftspeople and other folks that are kind of pursuing like food trucks and pop-ups, like that, culinary pop-ups. This weekend we have a pop-up thrift and vintage shop coming to set up in the tap room. And then we've got a guest brewers bottle release. We're going to host their bottle release next weekend. Radix Fermentation is going to release a few beers here at Supermoon. And then shortly after that, we're doing our first of what will be a ton of yoga here. So we're going to start to be for MKE social yoga. And it's kind of just like a come in before we open on the second Saturday of every month for yoga, and then everyone gets a beer mosa, which is kind of cool.
Ooh, nice.
And then we are really pumped about our Valentine's Day event. We are working with a shop out of Cedarburg called Franny's Market. Sarah Prasser is the owner, and she and I spent some time kind of going through her catalog of specialty cheese and charcuterie to develop a pairing menu. And we're hosting a cheese and charcuterie beer pairing event on Valentine's Day. It's kind of a prefix thing. We have 5 courses set, and tickets are up for sale, and it's on actual Valentine's Day, which is Tuesday, which is a day we're not normally open, but we're doing this event. And it's going to be awesome. That I've done a bunch of these types of pairings in my time, and I am genuinely so excited about what we've put together. The pairings are like incredible, and it's going to be a really tasty event, really delicious, and just like a real ton of fun to get people here on Valentine's Day.
Well, it sounds like a great gift to get someone, like, especially if you can't think of anything, like take them out to a brewery, have some cheese and beer.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds fantastic.
Right.
We'll have these, we light the place with like these little baby kerosene lamps and tea lights.
Aww.
And it'll look the part. It's going to be a cozy kind of nice experience for people. So yeah, we're pumped.
Hint,
That's
that's awesome.
Right. Just take notes.
Yeah. So you have a lot going on at Supermoon. You've made so many gains and so many big achievements. What's next for you guys? Like, what are you looking forward to doing next?
I think starting to scale a little bit. This is it's a decidedly small operation. It's an intentionally small operation. I spent enough time in the industry before this just to kind of start to understand, like, if I ever got to do this for myself, and my wife and I kind of like made the ultimate commitment to it, just how big we needed to be to kind of make sure that people are like taken care of here, that work here, and that our business is healthy and successful. And we have pretty modest goals for how much we're going to be making and producing and growing, but we have maxed out where we're at, and we're going to be scaling up and ordering some larger stainless vessels this year. We're hoping that we can actually scale up some of our wood vessels as well and get some custom-made wood fermentation tanks. So from a production standpoint, that's kind of somewhere where we're headed. And then I'm just like really excited about some of these partnerships we're developing with other creative people that can kind of use our space for what they do and to kind of showcase what they do, and just be of some sort of value to the community.
And it seems like you fit in really well with Bayview, and they've really accepted you, and it seems like things are just going really well.
Thanks. Yeah, finally. We're feeling really good about the momentum, and like, again, I just have to say it, like, could not be more thankful for all the support thus far. Like, you guys, anybody that's like come here and spent some time and their hard-earned money with us is wildly appreciated, because it is just us. It's Maria and I and our 2-year-old, and now we have 3 employees that are also kind of part of the operation, and the support in such a small, kind of like insulated small ship is so appreciated. Every dollar, every beer. It's cool to be a part of a community, but it's really cool to kind of feel like the community appreciates what you're doing and supports it that way.
And it'll be cool to see who moves in next door when that house goes up for sale.
I know. Well, there will have to be a really unique, set of people to live next to the brewery, but maybe it's not that hard of a sell, I guess, depending who you are.
They better like beer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I might have to have a sit down with them.
They'll learn to like beer.
Right.
How it goes.
Well, thank you so much for meeting with us. It was so cool to hear about Supermoon and kind of get some of our questions answered, like the ghost.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thanks for the conversation and the support, and for what you guys are doing to kind of keep signal boosting the breweries around here.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, and we'll see you back at Supermoon soon.
Sounds great. Take care.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
We've reached the end of this episode, but there's plenty more to keep you busy. For online source materials and proven case studies delivered right to your inbox, sign up for our mailing list by visiting marketthebrew.com. We'll see you next time on Market the Brew.